Hello. Today I wanted to talk about something that I've been reading lately. I guess this would be sort of like a book review of sorts, with a story. So, um, what I've been reading lately is the book called The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Um, Toni Morrison is a well known African American author who writes books generally about the African American experience following slavery, emancipation, and sort of, I suppose, the discourse or experience of living under a constitution that um, promotes equality, equity, upward mobility, liberty, and freedom for its population. So, The Bluest Eye is a book that came into my interest from my understanding of social value and experience when it comes to appearances. Um, for myself, I'm somebody who's often struggled with managing a coherent or um, understandable self image, and I often get swept into the other's perception of me as co constituting or co creating my idea of myself. So I often get swept up in the idea that of other people's ideas about who I am. So I get often lost in how to define myself and who I am. But this also comes too from theory that I've read about what the self is. Some perspectives that I've understood is if we go from New Age humanism, and at least that's the category of Eckhart Tolle, who would say that all ideas and thoughts are simply abstractions, um, and that they actually hold no groundedness or solidity to reality. And so we might simply allow ourselves the freedom to release from the the cage of language that might hold us back, say the thoughts and feelings and perceptions of reality that might consequentially be created from our perception of ourselves. Um, that is also to say and to recognize that sometimes thoughts of ourselves can be good. Like we might have a positive self image, and if we've been able to cultivate a positive self image, language can be something of an anchor that can support our capacity to live well. But it also consequentially, as reality doesn't hold on to positivity or require it, negativity through negative self talk or perceptions through others of oneself may create a living hell through language. Furthermore, Krishnamurti would be somebody who would also be somewhat in line with the idea that reality and language is not an anchor, but it's simply like a guidepost, and it's an object of the ego. So if we let go, of course, to our ego and to language, we might simply be able to accept reality more so than be held back by identifying with the human constructs that it's created. So anyway, I mean, furthermore, I've been reading a bit of Judith Butler and The Psychic Power of Life, and also how to transgress through the social world's definitions of reality that anchor us in the world. For certainly, they do anchor us in the world, and yet they also do not have a capacity to completely define us as who we are. And so we often, I mean, this is simply, the parallax view in action. It's, as we walk around an object, the object is always shifting and changing. It's not as if humanity or anything has a true capacity to sit in truth at an object and be able to know its pure form. That's not something of our capacity. We are also a part of the universe, so we are in process of identifying it as it is in process, which means it's still moving and changing and morphing and evolving, or whatever it might be doing in that moment. And so, I mean, through my own challenges with language and how, and the perception of the other, I was curious as to, Toni Morrison's work. Toni Morrison, I read her book on Sula, and it was, Sula was another novel which was about, how people change through experience, that maybe it's opening up a lens or capacity to see that people or environments or situations often completely shift who we were and have a capacity to change who we are in so many ways. And consequentially, what happens when people change, and when people don't change. So that was a really interesting novel, and I thought, okay, I want to have a lens into what being defined by the other means, and what the consequences of that experience were. So that brought me to The Bluest Eye. The Bluest Eye has centers around a character named Pecola, and Pecola is a little girl who grows up in, I think, small town America, primarily a black, neighborhood, but very much entrenched in standards of whiteness, standards of beauty, centered around whiteness, a sort of, I suppose, cloud of experience that's not really, or does not include the image, the voice, the experience of blackness, particularly blackness under slavery, and the atrocity and brutality of that social structure in America. And so Pecola grows up believing that she is disposable, essentially. She grows up believing that her blackness is a sin, that her nose is a sin, her African American nose, her features are a sin, that she is something to be ignored, something to be questioned, something to be I suppose, hurt in many ways. And, Pecola generally lives within a family unit very much brutally damaged by racism, by neglect, by greed. And so even as Toni Morrison kind of organizes the character of Pecola, she organizes her reality, and Pecola is a character who is raped in this book. Pecola is a character who is raped by her father, and Toni Morrison also does not shed characters in simply one-dimensional, archetypes where, the rapist is somebody who, is simply an evil, you know, selfish narcissist who simply desires destruction and fulfillment, but she tries to create it as a consequence of structural racism, that the neglect, the betrayal, the absence of blackness from the American story of possibility creates the conditions or supports the conditions of a certain type of psychotic existence where the father is absent of experience, of emotion, of capacity to even attempt to live with a conscience of awareness, of care, of empathy, of compassion. And it becomes very evident that the conditions that created the situation where Pecola is not only understanding herself as disposable, but also in spaces that support her erasure, support her disposability, and support her self-harm in some ways, that this, yeah, we can understand, or at least the author is attempting to create an understanding as to why the situation is as it is for Pecola. And as I was reading this book as well, I went to a social meetup because I wanted to talk about this in regard to philosophy. I have a philosophy meeting, and at this meeting, we were discussing critical thinking. And I mean, I felt like the conversation wasn't critical. I didn't feel that it had anything to do with grounded practical reality and struggle that we might be going through as a species. It kept wandering around, a capacity to be valued and intelligent, and worthy. And I mean, I guess it's important to discern what things mean, but I just was like, I brought up the book. I brought up The Bluest Eye, as in we were circling around definitions about what critical thinking was, being agreeable or not agreeable. And it was very just PG-13, or just, something everybody could get a comfortable word around. And then I was like, critical thinking might be an important tool to understand structural racism. And an example would be The Bluest Eye. I think that a lot of people walk through the world believing that their value is tied to the social world that they come up in, when that social world is working within moving definitions that are organized around power structures. And I felt it was important that critical thinking open up the possibility that we might be able to acknowledge the lived experience of people who live through these brutal forms of violence, and have opened up a dialogue towards our institutional frameworks, and questioning furthermore how they're operating to either improve people's lives, and on the opposite end, destroying people's lives in order to maintain legitimacy in some way. And it was shut down which was really disappointing. I felt that the facilitator kind of it didn't go anywhere. It's just like I had these feelings, and they were just like, well, we can't really do anything about that. You need to just accept that racism is real, and that's not a conversation nobody wants to get into. I noticed people were uncomfortable, but and then they didn't want to touch that topic, and I was like, why aren't we touching that topic? Why we I don't know. I felt, yeah, it wasn't in one way. Maybe it wasn't appropriate, but in a way it was, because I don't feel like we live in a world where we're acknowledging these things, or we don't want to be uncomfortable when I think a lot of people in our lives are, and our friends often are silenced. They're not able to share their realities because there's no resources out there to help them understand that often, many people in marginalized communities are facing so many forms of violence and erasure and destruction because of power, and that power has relations to certain identities. So anyways, yeah, this is the experience. I think so far this book is, yeah, it's good, but it's very hard to read. If you are interested, Toni Morrison is a really good author. So I'm going to continue to try to finish this book, and thanks for listening.